をしたって言うんだ。さっぱりわからない。でもわからなくてもいい。どうでもいい。
完成だ。やっと変わってくれた。君は私に似ていた。だから私のような人生を送ってほしくなかったんだ。
おい、鼻水が喋った。
Last time on Mob Psycho, we answered the question in Season 1 of if people can change with a resounding yes. Shigeo Kagayama, also known as Mob, managed to maintain his belief, despite compromise, that he doesn't need to rely on his power and that he shouldn't, especially if it comes to hurting people. But Season 2 poses an answer to a different question than before, not if people can change, but should we let them? And how far should we go to give them that chance that Mob gave himself? And we begin this question with episode 1 of season 2 and the power of radical empathy. Just like in season 1, Mob is still a bit of a loser, but he's making progress. He has friends now, like the Body Improvement Club, like Taruki, like the Telepathy Club, people who push him to better himself, and people who still kind of take advantage of him. Misato, a student reporter who witnessed Mob's first battle with Dimple and his subsequent legend as the Psycho Helmet, a religious figure with a cult-like following, and convinces him to run for student president so he can have a shot with Tsubomi, his childhood crush, and also to prepare him to lead the masses of his followers.
But that's not important right now.
Of course, Mob spends his entire 5-minute speech unable to say a single word, and his confidence is decimated, until he receives a surprise confession from Emmy, a girl in his class he's never interacted with before. And cue a very wholesome and happy Mob who we haven't seen like in a very long time. He's more active, he has a smile on his face, and he's really fun to watch, especially as all of his peers looked shocked at the news that Mob seems to have a girlfriend. And for her part, Emmy's rather endearing, soft-spoken but able to speak her mind, and actually relatively self-conscious about writing, her favorite hobby. Of course, it's clear something else is going on, because, I mean, who would watch that and be like, that's the guy I need to spend my life with? Emmy confronts Mob after about a week of them walking home together, and after he reads her story and unintentionally offends her, she asks why he rejected her, asking him out earlier, yet still walks home with her every day. Does he not have feelings, opinions of his own, or does he just do things to appease others or act as others say, like how Emmy only asked him out because she lost a bet with her friends? And instead of devastating Mob, this causes him to think, because he does have feelings. He very clearly has feelings and opinions. He's just a rather passive person. And in truth, he didn't hang out with her because he pitied her or he felt an obligation, but because he genuinely enjoyed her company, even if it was under false pretenses. And this leads to, in my opinion, the most beautiful scene of season 2. Emmy is stopped by her friends with a freaking huge asterisk next to the word friends on her way home, and they begin to make fun of and rip up her novel, something she clearly values. And Emmy just goes along with it, encourages them with a pained look on her face because she meant what she said. She doesn't think she has opinions, and as it all falls to the ground, Mob appears behind them, telling them to stop, because even if Emmy lied to him, Mob recognizes in her the same feelings of passiveness and indifference he spent all of season 1 working to break through. And he's even told to get a clue, something that did shatter him last season, but still, he walks up to the shredded story and starts picking it up, because he's made a decision to consider his feelings more, and you have to pick up the things you feel are important. And this small speech, this plea to Emmy, absolves him of his failure to speak earlier this episode. She ignores her friends, and she helps Mob pick up her pieces. Of course, in the end, it feels hopeless. The pieces are picked up and blown away by the wind, and Emmy, grateful but defeated, decides that she'll just try to rewrite it. And to our surprise, Mob does something he hasn't done in years. With the music rising under a setting sun, Mob uses his powers in front of Emmy, collecting every single piece of her story and putting it all back together, and calmly reveals to her that he happens to be an Esper. And in that instance, Tsubomi, who happened to be watching this whole exchange, gives Mob a smile. Smooth. And this scene is such a beautiful encapsulation of the growth of Mob from Season 1 and his trajectory for Season 2. He's unafraid to use his power to help people in need. He's able to stand up for what he believes in while still maintaining an ounce of apprehension and modesty. And he's more than willing to go out of his way to help the people who might not have been the kindest to him and show them that they too can change. Of course, these aren't the only dilemmas in Season 2 and the only questions Mob must face, because while this first episode of Mob Psycho is rather lighthearted, just like the setting sun that we see throughout this episode, there's a coming darkness this season that's unlike the one before. There's an aspect to Mob Psycho that we've been missing since the beginning: the nature of spirits and how they fit into the world at large. Mob occupies a space between the regular and the supernatural that led him to isolation for a very long time, and on a particular day, he has 3 interactions with the supernatural that leads to him asking some incredibly important questions. The first is a man hell-bent on having Reagan curse someone, and though Reagan appeases him and sells him a fake one, Mob is disturbed by how a human could actively want to curse someone, and how living with the knowledge that you've done something so horrible to a person would affect you mentally. The second is a call from a woman who claims a ghost is stalking her. She's absolutely terrified of this being, and it's honestly a very overall creepy exchange, especially for this anime, concluding in Mob and Reagan finding a man living next to her who uses his psychic abilities to spy on her. But once it's revealed that it's a person and not a ghost, the woman turns from fear to disgust, which, again, leads Mob to question, why do people behave so differently depending on whether something is a spirit or a person, supernatural or real? Because to Mob, they aren't that different. And third, Mob and Reagan are contracted to cleanse an abandoned home on a mountaintop of an evil spirit residing there. Their clients are adamant that this spirit needs to be gone no matter what, and Mob goes, preparing to exorcise them. And it's just a family of 3. Not an evil mutated spirit we're conditioned to see. These actually just look like silhouettes of gone people. And the father of the family begs Mob to leave them be so that they can spend just a little bit more time together before they pass on. It's a rather tense scene, highlighted when Dimple tries to force Mob's hand by telling the father of the ghosts that he should just kill the clients, turn into an evil spirit, and protect his family. And after a moment of struggle, the spirit refuses and simply gets on his hands and knees, accepting his fate. Luckily, Reagan comes in and convinces the clients that the spirit was exorcised after just throwing some salt around, classic Reagan, but this entire exchange shakes Mob the most because it's clear he doesn't categorize spirits and humans as separately as he once did. They're 2 sides of the same coin, and the audience realizes again that these spirits of Mob Psycho aren't all just wacky, crazy villains who we can just simply root against, but occasionally really sad individuals with their own wants and desires who were human once too, before something horrible made them this way, and asking Mob to get rid of them is very akin to asking him to murder someone. It's an incredibly humanizing moment, and it's absolutely necessary for the hardest and most dangerous spirit Mob will ever face. Enter Kaiji Mogami. Mogami is an odd break from the world of Mob Psycho. In some ways, he's a combination of Reagan and Mob turned unforgivably evil. A showman with incredible power, which might sound like a fun matchup. When I mentioned before a darkness hanging over Season 2, consider Mogami the absolute pitch of that darkness. The former greatest psychic of all time. While he started down Mob's path of using his powers to help others, he never had the support Mob did. Instead, he had what I assumed to be an abusive mother, dying of an illness, and he turned to despicable jobs for money to save her, jobs of murder and cursing that led him to become a beacon to evil spirits and eventually led to the death of his mother by exposure. In his grief and depression and haunting from his own mother, he made drastic changes to try to rid the world of evil spirits, to consume them, only to end his own existence and return as an evil spirit, vowing to hurt the people of this world who in his eyes are the greatest evil. And on this day, he possesses Minori Asagiri, daughter of a wealthy businessman, to lure psychics to this mansion on the pretext of exorcising Minori so he can kill them all for being frauds. And of course, Reagan, being Reagan, must accept, and Dimple has his history with Mogami, so when the trio arrive and all hell breaks loose, Mob, being slightly overpowered but still determined, enters the broken and battered body of Minori to exorcise Mogami from within. But it's a trap, and it's clear for the first time in his life, Mob is overpowered. But Mogami doesn't kill him. In Mob, he sees his same naive self, a young Esper trying to do good in a cruel world that doesn't deserve it. So he tries to convince Mob to turn his back on it all. Mogami takes Mob's spirit and places it inside of a world of his creation, a darker world where Mob never had the support he has now. No Reagan, no Dimple. Ritsu acts as if he doesn't exist. He's bullied and beaten mercilessly every day for the equivalent of months. And the cruelest thing is that it's not only Mogami doing this. Inside of this world, Minori, the girl Mob vowed to save, is the cruelest of them all. Mogami preserved her in this world, put her in Mob's class, and that's it. He didn't prompt her to do anything. He didn't ask her to bully him. She doesn't even realize this world's fake. She is a horrible, despicable person, all on her own. And Mob is forced to live this life, trapped in an endless stream of torment, caused almost exclusively by the person he's supposed to save. Until we finally see it happen. Mob snaps. He lashes out, uses fear and threats to force Minori to apologize to him in terror. And when he's beaten over the head with a brick, bleeding on the floor, he goes to kill those around him, bring the life from their bodies, and Mogami thinks he's won, that he's been right all along. Without the people around Mob, he would be no better than... But that's the point, isn't it? Mob's not alone. He's never been alone. Anybody could crack under the worst circumstances, but that just means we must be grateful for those in our lives who can steer us down better paths, offer us support in a cruel world to make it less so. And few people embody that more to Mob than Dimple, who goes from a manipulative cult leader bent on world domination to a spirit moved by the amount of trust a child he was planning to manipulate put in front of him, asking for nothing in return. Mob is both in need of support and gives his support near unconditionally, and with the words of his mentor and friend, Mob truly glows, resolved to show Mogami that his strength and save Minori no matter what, and begins the most amazing fight you've ever seen in Mob Psycho. Movie quality, tense, beautiful, with Mob's spirit embodying a slightly unrealistic form that matches the spirit of his conviction. Even with it all, Mob still nearly loses even at 100%, until it appears again, the entity within him, the question that not even Mogami understands. Mob awakes, alive and unbroken, because even though he used his powers on what he thought at the time were real people, he's beginning to learn to forgive himself for his mistakes and not let trauma he faced prevent him from moving forward. But not everyone is so optimistic, as we see Minori wake up as well, unpossessed, and she recognizes Mob from inside the fake world. And when he asks her if she really is always like what she was there, she confirms it, before offering a light apology for her months and months of physical and mental abuse of a child who risked everything to save her. And as she takes 2 steps away, you think that Mogami might have been right.
本当にごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。
But I don't think I've ever seen so much emotion conveyed in the tears of Minori and the soft piano that plays behind her as she can barely keep herself together. I actually did tear up a bit because, as awful as she was, Minori too is still a kid, subjected to horrifying things. And even if you can't forgive what she's done, it's incredible to see a story give a despicable character a chance to really wholeheartedly apologize. And to be honest, it probably wouldn't have mattered to Mob because he forgives her and thanks her without a second thought for proving to him that people can change by showing him a world where he never did, only reaffirming to Mob that everything that he's done up until now was not only the right decision, but a philosophy he can apply to others, no matter how terrible they may seem. People can change, will change if given the chance, and that's absolutely integral for the final act of Season 2. But before we get there, we have a little recap. Reagan goes through a midlife crisis, which has a huge impact on Season 3, so we'll discuss that when the time comes. And we have a major growth for Mob, nearly completing his very first marathon. And while he's out of breath and also passes out just before the end, he's in good spirits, because he manages to stay in the top half of the pack, a feat he couldn't have imagined only a few months ago. And even if he didn't complete his goal to ask Tsubomi out if he reached the top 10, he's still...
急に爆発するように火が出たんですって。放火かもって。火の中に入っていっちゃった。
大丈夫大丈夫大丈夫だよ。手がかりを探さなくちゃ。目を閉じろ。それを見るな、しよう。
There was something about Mogami's dream world that was both horrifying, but also an arm's length away. When Mob snapped there, even though he attacked his bullies, it wasn't real. There was a degree of separation that made us accept that event. This is the closest we've ever seen to Mob completely giving in. There is no scene in Mob Psycho more disturbing than this one, with Dimple screaming at Mob not to look, and the burned corpses of his family. Luckily, it's a bit of a fake out, otherwise this would have been an unbelievably dark turn for the show, but it highlights just how much we, the audience, and Dimple were afraid. Not that Mob's family was dead, but that Mob might have given in. And even though Dimple convinces Mob that the bodies are fake, it's still disturbing to watch, as Mob vows, despite everything he's learned, that those responsible for taking his family and making him worry will pay. And he finds and brutalizes with a disgust not unlike those villains before him, 2 members of an organization we've heard about once before. Enter Claw. Just like in Season 2, Claw, the parent organization for Scar, is the accumulation of everything this season's been building to. Claw and its leader, Toichiro Suzuki, plan on using an army of manufactured psychics to take over all of Japan, and eventually the world. But this Claw is different from the Scar of old. It focuses mainly on Suzuki and his overwhelming power and ego, and his strained relationship with his son, Sho, the redhead from Season 1. And the organization is far larger than Scar and far less personable, filled with foolish grunts destroying for the sake of destruction, and continuing to anger Mob with how flippantly they use their powers to hurt people. But not all is lost, because Mob's world is a large one, where the consequences of previous actions carry through. And in this case, it's in the form of the former members of Scar, who, through witnessing Reigen and Mob's philosophy and turning their lives around, have turned over a new leaf and have committed to protecting Seasoning City with the Espers, fighting psychics that far outclass themselves with the help of the Chad, Hanazara Teruki, in some of the greatest action pieces you'll ever see. And throughout this battle, growth and forgiveness are at the forefront. The former Scars fighting under Teruki, all of which are people Mob fought and forgave, coming to the rescue of Seasoning City. Mogami joining into the battle after escaping capture and being convinced by Mob's conviction to let a person go. Because despite the fact that Mob cannot prove without a doubt that those he shows mercy to will actually change, you have to have faith in people, else you'll never truly have anything. The introduction of Serizawa, a shut-in saved by Suzuki and subsequently taken advantage of, not unlike Mob and Reigen's dynamic, coming to grips with the fact that his boss isn't all he thought he was, as Toichiro beats Sho in front of him. And finally, the last fight of Season 2 of Mob Psycho, Mob vs. Toichiro. And there are layers to this fight, more than I could go into, but it's not just about forgiveness, but another theme that appears throughout the season, the bonds that bind Mob and those he cares about. The Body Improvement Club, risking their lives to save the life of their member. Dimple, an evil spirit becoming a guardian spirit for Mob. And Reigen, the con man and a parental foil to Toichiro, coming to the aid of his student despite overwhelming danger. Mob points out through his own experiences how Toichiro, who despite being the strongest psychic in the series, perhaps even stronger than Mob at points, is so alone, standing there with the realization that his son, his right hand, and his men who have begun to see him in a new light have all abandoned him. And Mob, in his good nature, offers the man who's caused his family and friends so much hardship, friendship, despite what he's done. Because even though Mob is willing to fight, and even though he makes mistakes, he doesn't want to. He hasn't forsaken the ideals of Mob of Season 1. He's simply far more capable of responding to violence if he has no other choice. And in this case, he might not, because Toichiro doesn't like the patronization he sees from a child, not one bit. And here is an incredibly disturbing fight. The power of Toichiro overwhelming Mob at points, bringing him to the brink of madness as he finally uses all of his power against an enemy until Mob realizes he's going too far. A parallel to Teruki crying as he launches building upon building at Toichiro, holding himself together as Toichiro batters and beats him, giving him into despair and deciding, like in the Scar base, that he can't change this man. And you can't blame Mob, because he's been on an emotional roller coaster for the last 48 hours. But it's no less disturbing watching Mob twist Toichiro, breaking his body, bulging his eyes, breaking his form, until only the absolute evil of his power remained, and only the desperate hope of Mob. The battle is messy, tragic, disturbing. It mentally breaks Mob, it physically breaks Toichiro, until the sheer amount of power Toichiro releases begins to overflow, and he starts to self-destruct. The self-destructive nature of his existence, giving everything for power, leading to his demise, threatening to destroy all of Seasoning City. Until Toichiro Suzuki is a man with everything. Unlimited power, to the point where, like Mob, he also has a countdown to 100%. He has an army created by power that he has bestowed upon them himself, after all of the experiments to create false espers failed. He has the power to make anybody do anything he ever wants, out of fear or out of respect. Except one person. The person he seemed to have cared the most about. A foil of Reagan, a foil of Mob, a man we pity despite his arrogance. A man where Mob can find two pieces of common ground. One in their abilities and power, and two in the fact that they both have something they need to say to someone, and neither have had the chance. And Mob, in his infinite foolishness, goes to the bursting Toichiro and vows to do everything he can to absorb his power and save his life. There isn't some philosophical waxing that could end this battle like Reagan did in Season 1. When faced with a threat greater than himself, Mob couldn't simply scare Toichiro into listening to him, because how do you scare somebody who considers themselves a god? You don't scare them, per se, you pity them. You show them kindness, you show them humanity and how lonely it is to be a god, how pride and obsession with being special, how never forgiving anyone and hating the world for not being as great as you is not only unhealthy, but not true. The world is full of billions of people and countless different lives, personalities, ideas, and mindsets. Comparing even just two people is a fool's errand. And judging them as greater or lesser than you is only going to make you feel more alone. The point of Mob Psycho 1 and 2 is not only that we can better ourselves, that we can change, that we can forgive ourselves and others, but also that no matter how much we hate to admit it, we're not the best judges of ourselves and our actions. We need others to compliment us, to train us, to reprimand and assist us, and to make us feel connected, so we know that our growth is worth it, that we will never become a person who sits in a high tower staring down with all the power in the world and yet completely alone. And I like that at the end of this story, after the day is saved, Mob is able to keep Toichiro from bursting and turn all of his power into a lovely little broccoli. Toichiro turns himself in and apologizes to Sho for keeping his mother out of their lives. And Sho catches him completely off guard by telling him that he meets with his mother regularly, and despite everything, she still asks how her husband is doing and that she still wants to see him again. And I think this highlights the last bit of godhood being stripped from Toichiro, proof that even in his pride, the world didn't need his permission to keep living. And if it ended there, it would be a job well done. But we have one last season and several loose ends that we still need tied up. And so, if you want to dive into the last season of Mob Psycho 100, then please consider liking, commenting, maybe even subscribing. This video took a lot of work and a lot longer than I anticipated, but we got some more short form content coming out, some more Mob Psycho video, and some other interesting things like for Trigun or more seasonal anime, as well as streams Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays with a pretty chill chat if you want to hang out, and well, plenty more stuff I've got planned, if a little slow at the moment. But yeah, if you are interested, if you liked this video, if you like anything else on this lovely little channel of mine, then please consider subscribing. I'm aiming for 1,000 subscribers by hopefully the end of the year, but if we can get there sooner, I'd be very proud. So yeah, my name is Locklan, Star Eyes, and thank you so much for watching. I hope I see you next time. Bye-bye!